to love in the coffee shop, in the pews, and on Main Street when Confederate flags line the sidewalks downtown. He wonders how to love when another kid breaks his toy, and I want to know how to love when another person breaks my heart. We both want to stop all the pain and the brutality, but we can't. So how do we live and love in the midst of it? I think it starts with resisting that knee-jerk temptation to circle the wagons. Instead of closing ourselves off, we can dive heart first into the mess, wrap our arms around each other, and climb out together. In a world gone mad, we can choose to stay in the thick of it and love our way to the other side. We can seek understanding. We can be with instead of against. We can identify our blind spots and ask questions when we don't understand someone else's point of view. We can approach life with humility and courage, leaning into our discomfort and big feelings instead of denying them. We can live and love in a broken world by running toward this thing called empathy. Empathy, to see another's pain, understand the cause of it, and then feel with them. The myth of empathy is that it requires shared experience. I don't believe that's true. While it certainly requires more work to empathize with those whose journeys differ from our own, it isn't impossible. It simply requires our effort and a real desire to learn. We may have to look more carefully, expand our worldview, open our ears and homes and hearts, but we can empathize with others regardless of our differences. We can choose to set aside our fears, judgments, and stereotypes. We can do this. And once we do, we will have taken our first steps on the path to loving our neighbors as ourselves. Jesus, our wise teacher, said it this way: "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Matthew 22, verses 37 through 40. Sometimes the simplest answers are the hardest answers. When everything else is falling apart and the world around us is in chaos, and we want to know what our part in the solution should be, we instinctively know the answer. The secular world calls it the Golden Rule, and the world's major faith groups agree on their own version of it. In 1993, a declaration drafted by Dr. Hans Küng was presented to the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, Illinois. He called it "Towards a Global Ethic, an Initial Declaration," and over 200 faith leaders from over 40 world religions signed their endorsement. Since then, thousands of other faith leaders and global citizens have signed their agreement to this declaration that states, "We must not live for ourselves alone, but should also serve others, never forgetting the children, the aged, the poor, the suffering, the disabled, the refugees, and the lonely." We commit ourselves to this global ethic, to understanding one another, and we invite all people, whether religious or not, to do the same. A quarter of a century has passed since the Declaration was first presented and agreed upon by people from every faith and walk of life. We've seen global terrorism rise, human trafficking continue, and economies rise and fall and totally collapse. We've seen genocide, civil wars and foreign wars, refugees board overcrowded boats that capsize at sea, and children wash up on the shores of Greece and even our own borders. We've seen gun violence overtake our schools and homes and streets and malls and movie theaters and churches. Racism continues to infect minds and hearts, and hate still kills. The world is in crisis today, just as it was 25 years ago, and still we look to our left and right and ask ourselves, how do I live in this mess? What is my role? We need to go back to Jesus' words: love God and love your neighbor. Just love. It's the answer to everything, all our hurt